Hey, welcome to Spectral Echoes, a collection of Reddit stories as told by people high as a kite. But it's Reddit, who knows, right? If you like the video, don't forget to like and subscribe, so you don't miss out on these awesome horror stories. Now, let's get started.
Explore the mysteries of the deep forest. The standing deer.
Some memories don't physically hurt us, but they etch themselves into our minds forever. Late last year, I rented a small cabin in the woods of Washington to escape the everyday pressures. Initially, everything was perfect. The babbling stream, the wind rustling through pine needles, clear skies, and an incredibly lush green landscape. But after just a few nights, that sense of peace mutated into a persistent unease. The third night was when everything changed. I was sitting alone by the rocky clearing, gazing up at the star-filled sky, keenly aware of my slow, steady breaths harmonizing with nature. Suddenly, not too far away, a figure emerged. It was a deer, but not quite a deer. It stood upright, its hind legs straight like a person's, standing motionless with eyes that were utterly black, chillingly empty. I blinked, and it was still there. I slowly backed towards the cabin, my heart pounding, feeling as if I was being watched. The next night, as I sat in the cabin reading and listening to music, the soft light reflecting in the cozy space, that deer appeared right outside the window. I saw it clearly this time. Its rigid posture, slender legs, and especially its eyes, soulless and devoid of emotion. Its eyes seemed to absorb light. They just existed, looking at me but not really seeing. I flicked on the lights and called my friend to check, but there was nothing there but darkness and the wind whistling through the cracks in the door. The haunting gradually consumed me. Every night, I'd wake up in the middle of the night hearing the rustling of leaves, turn on the lights and call for my friend, but only find cold wooden walls. I couldn't sleep deeply, couldn't eat lunch normally, and all my daily plans were disrupted by a sense of insecurity. My friend also started losing sleep. When we walked in the woods, I saw small, curved footprints that looked more like claws than deer hooves. One night, my friend mentioned hearing heavy breathing and faint laughter echoing through the woods, further convincing me that something unusual was out there. By the sixth night, I decided not to sleep in the cabin anymore but to lie outdoors by the rocky clearing, equipped with a flashlight, a warm blanket, and a knife under my pillow. Around 1 a.m., I suddenly startled when I saw those eyes. It stood still, its feet not moving, its gaze still fixed on me. I gripped my phone tightly, but couldn't bring myself to turn it on. The flashlight shone directly on it, but it was like an unmoving statue. Then I decided to quietly pack my belongings to leave as soon as it was light. We drove away from the dirt road without much conversation. I glanced in the rearview mirror. In the darkness of the forest, sometimes I thought I saw a small, hunched figure, seemingly standing farewell, waiting for us to return. Leaving that area was the best decision. Some people say it might have just been a hallucination, but I know I saw it clearly. Those black eyes didn't belong to the ordinary world, and their coldness wasn't psychological. Now, every time night falls, even just the wind outside my window makes me shiver. I can no longer go into the woods alone. I always need someone with me. I also don't dare to leave my curtains wide open, even just to make sure nothing is standing out there, watching me. Sometimes I wonder if that deer exists anywhere else or only there at that time, to tell me that there are parts of the forest that don't belong to humans, where natural eyes can turn into something inexplicable. Everything becomes unclear between reality and illusion, between material and spiritual. One thing I know for sure: some things always exist outside the ordinary, just waiting for an unsuspecting person to see them and carry the haunting for a lifetime.
The stranger with empty eyes.
It's not always about needing a clear reason to leave the city. Sometimes, it's simply waking up one morning and feeling suffocated by your own life. The noisy sounds, the relentless pace, the accumulated fatigue from work, from people, even from the quiet moments that aren't quiet enough, all making you realize that if you don't leave, your mind won't be clear enough to function normally anymore. I talked to a close friend, and it didn't take long for us to agree that we needed a long trip, no noise, no technology, no social media. Somewhere quiet, secluded, just the two of us and nature. The cabin I found was quite deep in a Washington forest. Not so isolated that there was no road in, but far enough that you wouldn't see another soul for hours. From the city, we drove about 3 hours, through deserted roads, over winding mountain passes. The tiny wooden cabin was nestled among ancient trees. Around it was an almost pristine wilderness, with trails covered in fallen leaves, the gentle babbling of a nearby stream, and cool breezes rustling softly through every leaf. When we first arrived, a true sense of peace spread through me. We brought books, enough food for a week, some essential cooking equipment, and a readiness for those rare slow days in this too-fast world. The first 3 days were truly wonderful. During the day, we hiked and explored the forest around the cabin, sometimes finding trails not on any map. In the evenings, we'd build a fire, cook, chat, and just immerse ourselves in a space filled only with the sounds of insects, rustling trees, and moonlight filtering through the canopy. The first few nights were peaceful, a little cold but comfortable. I thought it would be a perfect, much-needed retreat. Then, one evening, while my friend was busy writing in their journal, I decided to take a short walk alone around the cabin. It was already dusk, and the surroundings began to fade into twilight. I carried a small flashlight, just bright enough to see the path but not too strong to dazzle my eyes. The cool air, the smell of damp earth, and the gentle wind made me completely relax. I walked along a small, very narrow trail, almost covered by fallen leaves. Everything was fine until I spotted a silent figure standing in the distance, behind a large tree trunk. About 20 meters away from me, that figure didn't move at all. I thought it might be someone living nearby, but then I realized I was surrounded by nothing but forest, absolute wilderness, and the nearest cabin was at least a few kilometers away. The person didn't walk, didn't turn around, and showed no sign of recognizing that someone else was standing there looking at them. I shone my flashlight in that direction. The weak light swept over them like a thin streak, but what I saw just chilled me in an inexplicable way. The person's eyes were completely lifeless, pitch black, deep, and empty like a bottomless pit. There was no life in those eyes, no reflection, no glimmer of emotion, just the presence of a black void staring straight through me as if piercing my body. I froze for a few seconds. I don't know why, but a clear sense of panic surged, forcing me to turn around and head straight back to the cabin. I didn't tell my friend too many details right away. I just vaguely said I might have seen someone out there, or a strange shadow. My friend laughed and said I must have seen wrong, or maybe it was just a tree, an upright log that looked like a person. I didn't entirely believe that explanation, but I didn't want to dig deeper either. Still, in my mind, those pitch-black eyes were still vividly clear. Just a few hours later, as we were sitting in the cabin reading, I saw that figure again. This time, it was standing right outside the window. Not moving, not knocking, doing nothing. Just standing there. And its eyes, still those same eyes, staring straight at me. I didn't know what to do, just screamed for my friend. We both rushed outside, flashlights in hand, but there was no one there. Darkness again consumed everything, as if it had swallowed any remaining trace. No sound, no footsteps, nothing to prove that person had ever been there. But I knew what I had seen was real. From that night on, everything started to spiral. I couldn't sleep anymore. Every time I closed my eyes, that image appeared. The smallest sounds became terrifyingly clear, the rustling of dry leaves underfoot, faint breathing, sometimes even what sounded like footsteps stopping right against the cabin wall. I was no longer sure what was real and what was imagination. The feeling of being watched weighed heavily on every waking moment. My friend also started to change. They became quieter, occasionally zoning out while eating or reading. Once, they mentioned they thought they'd also seen a figure standing at the edge of the forest, but weren't sure because they only caught a fleeting glimpse. I looked at them, and in both our eyes at that moment, there was a silent acknowledgement that we were no longer in control of reality. Just a few hours later, as we were sitting in the cabin reading, I saw that figure again. This time, it was standing right outside the window. Not moving, not knocking, doing nothing. Just standing there. And its eyes, still those same eyes, staring straight at me. I didn't know what to do, just screamed for my friend. We both rushed outside, flashlights in hand, but there was no one there. Darkness again consumed everything, as if it had swallowed any remaining trace. No sound, no footsteps, nothing to prove that person had ever been there. But I knew what I had seen was real. From that night on, everything started to spiral. I couldn't sleep anymore. Every time I closed my eyes, that image appeared. The smallest sounds became terrifyingly clear, the rustling of dry leaves underfoot, faint breathing, sometimes even what sounded like footsteps stopping right against the cabin wall. I was no longer sure what was real and what was imagination. The feeling of being watched weighed heavily on every waking moment. My friend also started to change. They became quieter, occasionally zoning out while eating or reading. Once, they mentioned they thought they'd also seen a figure standing at the edge of the forest, but weren't sure because they only caught a fleeting glimpse. I looked at them, and in both our eyes at that moment, there was a silent acknowledgement that we were no longer in control of reality. Back in the city, I've often wondered if I truly saw someone or if it was just a series of hallucinations caused by stress and the isolated environment. But no explanation can account for those eyes. That wasn't something I imagined. Not the vagueness of a shadow. It was a real gaze, and it carried an emotion that cannot be named. Perhaps it was a person. Perhaps it wasn't. And the scariest thing isn't its appearance, but the feeling that it never truly left. That trip changed me a lot. From loving the forest, loving isolation, loving absolute quiet, I started to look at nature with a different perspective. Nature can be gentle, but it can also hide things not meant for humans. There are places, there are beings, there are gazes that one should not touch. And I know that, perhaps for the rest of my life, I will never forget those deep, soulless black eyes, the thing that instilled in me a haunting that no words of comfort can erase.
The strange tapping on the tent wall.
I still clearly remember my first camping trip with friends. We were all nature lovers, keen on exploring and seeking new experiences beyond our daily lives. The noisy, bustling city life made everyone crave a quiet escape to reconnect with nature, breathe fresh air, and feel true peace. So, late last summer, our group decided to go camping deep in a pristine forest a few hours' drive from the city. This forest had an unknown beauty with dense, overgrown trees and clear streams gurgling through it. Before the trip, we thoroughly researched beautiful spots around the area online, hoping for a truly immersive nature getaway. I still clearly remember my first camping trip with friends. We were all nature lovers, keen on exploring and seeking new experiences beyond our daily lives. The noisy, bustling city life made everyone crave a quiet escape to reconnect with nature, breathe fresh air, and feel true peace. So, late last summer, our group decided to go camping deep in a pristine forest a few hours' drive from the city. This forest had an unknown beauty with dense, overgrown trees and clear streams gurgling through it. Before the trip, we thoroughly researched beautiful spots around the area online, hoping for a truly immersive nature getaway. The whole group turned on their flashlights, sweeping the area. The beams cut through the thick darkness of the old forest, but we found no trace of anyone or any animal. Everything remained eerily silent, only the sound of insects and leaves rustling in the wind. We walked around the tent, checking every nook and cranny, but there was absolutely no sign to explain those strange taps. I tried to reassure everyone that it might be the wind making branches hit the tent or the sound of falling branches, but deep down, the unease persisted. We went back to sleep, but less than half an hour later, the tapping echoed again. This time it was more continuous, still 3 taps, much steadier and clearer. It was like an intentional rhythm meant to draw attention. None of us could ignore it. None of us could fall back asleep. The whole group stayed awake all night, staring intently around, flashlights sweeping every dark corner, but still finding nothing. The air was heavy, silent, with only the tapping echoing in the night forest. I began to feel the presence of something invisible yet haunting, something that didn't belong to this world and seemed to be very close to us. My mind reeled with unanswered questions, and the nameless fear grew heavier. Everyone's eyes clearly showed fatigue and anxiety. We could only sit still, trying to remain calm to get through the endless night. The next morning, the group discussed what had happened. Everyone was tired, a little scared, but no one wanted to end the trip. We still had many plans to explore deeper into the forest ahead. Everyone told themselves it might be due to the darkness and stress making us paranoid. I wanted to believe that too, to keep my spirits steady. However, when the third night came, the tapping echoed again, not just once but multiple times, about 5 to 6 times throughout the night. Each time it was 3 taps, with equal intervals, forming a clear, non-random rhythm. The tapping didn't sound like ordinary natural sounds, but rather like a warning or a challenge. No one in the group dared to close their eyes. We huddled together, our eyes fixed on the tent wall, our ears listening to every sound around us in extreme tension. The next morning, as faint sunlight filtered through the trees, I discovered small footprints around the tent area. But the strange thing was that these footprints didn't resemble normal human or forest animal tracks. They looked like claw marks, rough and sharp, circling around and then disappearing deep into the forest. I called everyone to see, and a chill ran down everyone's spine. Those footprints left us even more bewildered. In the following days, some people in the group started to panic. They said that during the night, they had heard heavy breathing, faint laughter, and even whispers echoing deep in the forest. I didn't hear anything beyond the strange tapping, but just by looking at my friends' eyes and expressions, I knew they were deeply haunted. The atmosphere in the group was always heavy. Everyone was tense and felt an indescribable fear. By the 4th night, the tapping became more intense than ever. The taps came from different directions around the tent, sometimes as if someone was standing right next to the tent wall, tapping continuously and relentlessly. The sound echoed so loudly it felt like our hearts would drop out. The tapping nearly drove the whole group mad. No one had enough calm left to endure it anymore. We couldn't stay there any longer. The feeling of fatigue, fear, and mental pressure gradually rose, weighing heavily on each of us. The taps were not merely sounds but like an invisible power crushing our spirits. Finally, the entire group decided to pack up that very night, trying to leave the forest as quickly as possible. The next morning, as the sun climbed high, we left the forest with heavy hearts, exhausted and haunted. The trip that was supposed to be a relaxing getaway to connect with nature turned into the most terrifying memory of my life. I cannot explain who or what was tapping on our tent that night. Perhaps it was a supernatural phenomenon or some mysterious creature living in the forest, but it is certain that the deep forest is not always as peaceful as it seemed.
The Non-Existent Trail.
Last October, 2 close friends and I decided to go backpacking and camping deep in a forest in Western Canada. We were all experienced hikers, having trekked and camped overnight many times before. So this time we prepared quite thoroughly. GPS, paper maps, flashlights, plenty of food and drink, and full survival gear. Our goal was to find a quiet place, far from crowds, to fully enjoy immersing ourselves in the wild. We set up camp by a small stream, surrounded by dense, old pine trees. The atmosphere was peaceful. The babbling water, mixed with bird songs, created a wonderfully relaxing symphony of the ancient forest. During the day, we explored the nearby area, gathered firewood, took photos, and chatted happily. On the first afternoon, when I went out to collect firewood, I incidentally discovered a small trail, almost entirely covered by weeds and bushes. What caught my attention was that this trail didn't appear on the paper map, nor was there any sign of it on the GPS. However, on the ground of the trail, there were fresh footprints, quite clear and still wet. Curious, I walked a few dozen meters into the trail. As soon as I stepped onto the trail, the air around me suddenly grew much colder, feeling heavy and oppressive. Even the sounds of birds and the small stream seemed to vanish, replaced by an eerie silence. I stood still for a moment, trying to look further ahead, but the dense trees limited my vision. I decided to head back to camp, still with an unexplainable feeling. That night, gathered around the campfire, I recounted the story of the strange trail. One friend decided to try walking into it himself. But what sent shivers down everyone's spines was when he returned, telling us that as he went deeper, at the end of the path was an ancient tree trunk split by lightning, and some kind of old cloth or rag inside the trunk. What was more terrifying was that he heard a voice, exactly like mine, echoing in the forest, calling his name. He was certain it was my voice, even though I was sitting right in camp, not calling out at all. We looked at each other. A feeling of fear began to creep into each of us. The story was no longer a joke. I wondered what was happening in this forest, whether it was a hallucination or something beyond our understanding. The next morning, we decided to pack up and leave the forest earlier than planned. Everyone wanted to escape this place quickly. But then strange things started to happen. No matter which direction we went, the GPS and compass acted abnormally, continuously pointing us back to the original campsite. What's more, the paper map was useless. Familiar trails vanished or seemed to no longer exist. We felt trapped in an endless forest labyrinth, unable to find our way out despite our best efforts. We tried many methods, following the sunlight, following the stream to find a residential area or a main road, but we were always pulled back to the same spot. When night fell, exhaustion, tension, and fear reached their peak. It felt like the forest had surrounded us, not allowing us to escape. This situation lasted for 3 consecutive days. Every day we tried a new direction, but the result was always the same. Modern equipment, GPS, compass, paper maps, they all seemed to be neutralized by an invisible force. And at this point, I was certain that something was amiss. On the 4th day, another strange thing happened. The GPS suddenly started working normally again, pointing us to the correct path out of the forest. No one in the group believed it, but we had no other choice but to leave immediately. Upon returning, I reviewed the maps, the traces, and the locations we had visited. I was absolutely certain that the trail I had walked into was not on any official map, and that part of the forest seemed to exist strangely in parallel, hidden from modern technology. To this day, I still cannot explain what happened, but I firmly believe that the forest is not just an ordinary forest. There is something beyond understanding that trapped us, making it impossible to escape easily. When I think back, the fear didn't come from something clearly present, but from the mystery itself, the silence, and our helplessness in the face of something inexplicable. Perhaps that deep forest hides secrets that humans cannot fully comprehend, and when you step into it, time and space become warped?
The strange appearance of Pinecones.
I'm 27 this year, and this story happened when I was 22. At that time, I was the kind of person who loved forests, enjoyed solo camping trips, the more remote the better. The fewer people, the better. I'd been to many places, from Oregon to Utah, but this trip to a deep forest in Northern California was the first time I truly felt uneasy. And even now, 5 years later, I still can't explain what really happened. That day, I set off early in the morning, hiking a long 2-hour trail from the parking spot deep into the forest, reaching an open area near a grassy field nestled among low hills. There were no tall trees there, no dense foliage, just grass and a few bushes along the edges. I chose that spot because it was open, easy to observe, and far from any common trails. The first and second days passed very peacefully. I set up camp, built a fire, cooked, wrote in my journal, and wandered around exploring the nearby forest. Everything was wonderful, and I didn't notice anything unusual at all. Then, on the evening of the 3rd day, as I was sleeping, I suddenly woke up around 2 a.m. I heard a soft thump sound against the tent fabric. Not too loud, but distinct. At first, I thought it was a dry branch falling or a squirrel climbing over. I closed my eyes, thinking there was nothing to worry about. But then, just 5 minutes later, the sound came again. This time it was 3 consecutive thump, thump, thump sounds. I sat up, turned on my flashlight. Outside, it was pitch black, so quiet I could hear my own heart beating. I slightly unzipped the tent door, shone the light out, but there was no one, no animal, not even a gust of wind, no rustling branches. The next morning, I went out to check around the tent. At first, I didn't notice anything, but upon closer inspection, I saw a few small stones scattered near the base of the tent. The strange thing was that there were no stones around my camping area because I was in a flat grassy field with relatively soft soil, and to find stones like those, I'd have to go to the edge of the forest over 100 meters away. I told myself that perhaps the wind had blown some stones from somewhere the night before. I'd heard about animals like bears or squirrels throwing objects, so I guess that might be it. But then on the 4th night, things started to get stranger. It was that sound again, but this time more frequent, more intense, and there was also a clinking sound like stones rolling against the metal frame of my tent poles. I began to suspect someone was messing with me. Maybe a group camping nearby, who knew I was alone here and wanted to play a nasty trick. But for the past 3 days, I hadn't heard any human sounds, no camp smoke, no footprints other than my own. I went outside around 3 a.m. Flashlight in hand, I swept the beam around. And this time, I saw many pine cones on the ground around the tent. At least over 20 pine cones along with small stones. Some pine cones were even on top of the tent, clearly having fallen or been thrown from above. What scared me a little was that there were absolutely no pine trees in the area where I had set up my tent. I had chosen this spot precisely because it was open, with no dense tree cover, no falling leaves or insects. To gather pine cones, I would have to go deep into the forest, at least a 5-minute walk away. So where did they come from? I started to worry, but still tried to convince myself it was a prank. Maybe someone was hiding in the forest, throwing stones and pine cones to scare me. But the problem was, I had never seen any sign of anyone else being there. And who would be so idle as to quietly walk hundreds of meters into the forest just to throw small stones and then disappear? The 5th night was when I decided I would leave. Around midnight, I was lying down when I heard noises again. This time it was a rustling sound, like someone rummaging through bushes, followed by thumping sounds like hail being thrown at the tent. I sat bolt upright, holding my breath. And then I heard a sound that I still can't forget to this day. From somewhere in the darkness, a very faint, distant growl echoed, but it was clearly real. Not the wind, not an animal. It was like something intentionally suppressed to keep the volume low, but still loud enough for me to hear. That growl made all the hairs on my body stand on end. I saw nothing, no one appeared, but I knew I was not welcome here. It felt like I had entered a place without permission, as if the forest or something within it was trying to drive me away. I stayed awake all that night, sitting in my tent, clutching my flashlight and pocket knife. Not daring to go outside, not daring to sleep. And as soon as there was light, I folded my tent and packed everything as quickly as possible. I left the area, constantly looking around as I walked. I didn't see anyone, no animals, but that feeling still unsettled me, yet also made me believe something was truly there. When I got home, I told a few close friends about it. Some laughed, saying it was probably due to fatigue and imagination. Others suggested it could be large owls, bears, or even Bigfoot. But honestly, I'm not sure I want to know the answer. The only thing I know for sure is this: those pine cones and stones couldn't have gotten to my spot by themselves. Someone or something brought them there, repeatedly, for several nights. And that faint growl? It was no hallucination. Since that trip, I've continued camping, but never alone again. And I definitely will never go back to that forest, no matter what.
If you like the video, don't forget to like and subscribe, so you don't miss out on these awesome horror stories.